watching Breakthrough News. I think I was off there. Now I'm here. Okay, you are watching Breakthrough News. It's here. It's live. This is real life. I am one of your co-hosts, Eugene Perrier, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Kalik. Rania, good to be back with you.
Good to be back on with you, Eugene. I just had like an explosion of the powder as the opening was happening, and I thought it was going to ruin everything. And it's okay. I just want to tell everyone.
Are you the person who left that Coke in the White House? What is going on right now?
Oh my God, I love how that just worked. I wasn't even meaning for it. No, face powder. So that
okay. Shiny. Well, I didn't. You mean baby powder? Powdered milk. You just said the powder exploded.
Or the Coke powder. No. I was like closing my powder, and I did it like I wasn't looking, and it was the wrong way, and then it poured on the keyboard, and I had to get it off the keyboard. So as the opening's happening, I'm sitting here just trying to get powder. And now my hands feel very funny, but I'm going to be okay. But wow, in case everybody's like, why does Rania?
Freedom Side Live fans, you're really seeing what it goes into making this show.
Well, I had to share because it just felt really funny to me that it's like, of course, it's going to happen right as the opening is taking place. It's just that day. True. It's that sort of day. I'm good, Eugene. How are you? You asked. No, I don't know if you asked, but
I can tell you I have no powder on me whatsoever. So I'd say in that sense, I'm doing well. I was also not the person at the White House, whoever that may have been. I don't know. That's my favorite story of the past 5 days.
Did it rhyme with funter?
Well, all I can say is the White House communications director was at pains to let the media know, and it was Politico, not me, who said she was at pains that the first family had already left the White House the day prior to the incident. So even though she didn't say it, basically saying, I know what you guys think, but it wasn't him.
Well, there's lots of cocaine being done probably in different parts of the White House. I would assume.
Indeed.
I mean,
and they found it in the area that's like where you enter for the tours, but I'm not saying it was someone on the tour, but like kind of everyone can come in there. People who are coming for tours, people who are coming for meetings, people who work there. So as law enforcement has said, the culprit will likely never be found.
Well, could you imagine though, if of all the places that we think of when we think of cocaine, I think we usually think of like popular culture. It's like on like some, bathroom. Yeah. In the bathroom at some club or something, but people are like, yeah, I gotta go into like this part of the White House so I can take a line. Yeah. Is it like on a school field trip? Like what?
Yeah, that actually sounds like maybe the most likely. I will say, the strip club where Hunter Biden was smoking crack, very famously, Archibald is like 2 blocks away from the White House. So,
oh yeah,
I don't know if he's fully exonerated, but yeah, it seems like we'll never know who it was. I guess I'm glad it wasn't anthrax or anything like that. That was, some sort of biological attack or something, which is what they thought it was at first, but just run-of-the-mill narcotics. But on that
that sounds like a great advertisement, like a marketing campaign. Just run-of-the-mill narcotics. Get your run-of-the-mill narcotics.
The way things are going, that might actually be an ad on the TV in not too long. Anyway,
Anyway.
Well, I don't know what the temperature is there in Lebanon. I don't follow that, but around the world, the past 3 days have been basically the hottest days in the history of the recording of hot days, which goes back, well, there's a couple. One that goes back to the 1800s, another 1979. But nonetheless, unofficially, Monday, I believe, was actually the hottest day in history. But Tuesday was also pretty up there, and I believe yesterday as well. So July 3 through 5, 2023 are, at least unofficially, we have to wait for some time here, the hottest days on record, which is amazing.
Oh, wow.
When you think about it.
That is
the hottest days in history.
Ever recorded.
Ever.
That's
like
scary.
The global average.
That's really scary. But Eugene, it kind of sounds to me like isn't the world's always been warming? I don't know why you're
it's the natural rise and fall. If people aren't concerned at this point, I don't really know what to tell you. We've got Canadian wildfires, which are worse than ever, blanketing the United States in smoke. Beijing had 5 straight days of 95-degree weather. It's very, very hot. Antarctica, it was on this hottest day ever, 8 degrees warmer than the average of the last 50 years on that day in Antarctica. So at a certain point, you had to ask yourself, I have to say the new Netflix nature documentary that has Sir David Attenborough has a lot of like climate change stuff. So I'm sure whatever Republicans hated it because it's woke or something. But one of the saddest ones is it's talking about polar bears that, of course, are moving around between the ice. But now how there's so few ice flows at certain parts of the year, they're having to swim further and further. So the cubs, a lot of them are drowning and dying because they have to swim so far between the different areas where they can get out and get food. And even if they make the swim, a lot of times the young are so weak, they struggle to like climb up on the rocks and like get food or whatever. So it's like basically the extinction of polar bears in front of your eyes. It's really quite disturbing, I have to say. Interesting thing to see. But yeah, if you're out here talking about climate change is fake and the Earth is always warming, I don't really know what to tell you at this point.
Well, I mean, good luck in the fire. I guess I don't know what to say either. No, I mean it's really horrible, and it's like I remember actually I did see the headline that you're talking about in a few places, but it was just kind of like a shrug.
Yeah.
Like that's the news about climate change these days. Like there are all these like really apocalyptic reports and like findings. It's like we're experiencing an extinction era. It's like more animals have gone extinct in the last however many years than like ever in the history of the earth ever. And it's just kind of like shrug.
Yeah.
Oh well, like shrug. We're just gonna keep doing like the whole world just gonna keep being super capitalist and like agriculture and just everything, all like agribusiness and the military industrial complex and the Pentagon being the biggest polluter in the world and on and on and on.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what are you gonna do? Maybe we can green the military. Yay, Elizabeth Warren. Like I don't really know what to do anymore. I guess I get really I know I'm starting like to sound like a nihilist about this, but it's upsetting. It's upsetting because this is obviously like such a big deal. And then of course there's like people dying of heat. That's the other thing too. Like when we talk about a hotter earth, there are parts of the world like India, Pakistan, where more and more every year people are just dying of heat.
Yeah, Washington State last year when they had that massive heat snap, and a lot of people died because they're not prepared for that kind of quick shift. You know what I mean? No, I think it's very, very real, and it's honestly concerning. And so many of the conflicts we see around the world are so deeply related to this. I mean, you look at what's happening all across the Sahel, Mali, Sudan, Burkina Faso, all these countries. I mean, a huge factor is the growing desertification in the northern parts of the country, which have heavily increased all of the competition for land, for water, different types of resources that play like a very important but sort of underlying factor. I mean, even the Arab Spring, the impact of climate change on Egypt and the elements of the various wheat crops and other things that they're trying to grow and the challenges with that, playing a role in people, living in poverty and not having enough to eat. So it's like, many people I think view it as kind of a one-off issue. It's really this daisy chain of events, this daisy chain of just terrible things that are knock-on effects from this. So yeah, 3 hottest days in history. I mean, that really is
That's crazy.
something.
That's crazy. Like when you really think about how long like history is. The 3 hottest days in history. No. It's like that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time. And there's like so much, of course, like there's like a cycle that goes, not a cycle. There's like a domino effect of that, like which is basically what you're mentioning.
Well, I got another crazy stat for you, Rania.
Right.
Started with 3 hottest days of the year. Also, a study that came out earlier this week, maternal deaths in America doubled between 1999 and 2019. So the number of women dying in childbirth doubled between 1999 and 2019 in the richest country in the history of countries. The number of women dying while giving birth has doubled. That shocked me.
Is there a reason? Is like a reason given?
Well, there's a number of reasons that are spoken to. I mean, some people would say a controversial issue, but not that controversial issue. But I think you may be able to guess the reason to some degree because the highest increases were amongst indigenous people and Black people. So I think we can pretty much put the culprit on the racist provisioning of healthcare and racist doctors. I mean, people who have less access to good healthcare, less access to good public health information, less access to public health professionals, and populations that it's been proven that medical professionals who are not of their race often doubt, especially Black women, often doubt things they're saying, especially around pain, which of course is the first marker, right, that your body is giving that something is wrong as you're in pain. But it's often ignored by different people like that. So there are different
different
people who will
reasons.
push back on those kind of things. There's obviously different elements, but it just sort of seems a little ridiculous that you would look at the populations who are the most affected and not think that there's an issue of racialized provision of the necessary resources.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it's just like this has been an ongoing problem too. And it's also like, how is this possible in 2023? Like, because
It's
there are
amazing.
ways. There's like there's been studies done on how to make sure that women don't die in childbirth. Like, we know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And it's like when it's not being done, it's like there's like an intentional policy situation taking place, specifically towards a certain group of people or certain groups of people. So it's like not an accident, is all I'm saying.
No, it's not an accident at all. And it's like, people say mainly point to the South as one of the worst places, which it is pretty bad. But this study lays out that a lot of the, as you can imagine, in terms of indigenous people being heavily affected, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, I think actually New York might be kind of high on there. I don't have the map in front of me right now, but I felt like that was one that kind of jumped out at me in terms of the highest increases. But nonetheless, I mean, in 2019, 1,210 women died while giving death. I mean,
oh my God.
Yeah. Up from
That's so
505.
crazy. This is like, it's like outrageous. This is like outrageous. It's like actually criminal. And again, like we know very well what needs to be done to prevent women from dying during childbirth, including like the care that needs to be taken throughout a pregnancy, including warning signs. And then, like you said, like there is this belief that like women of color are just supposed to like feel pain, like have like a higher tolerance for pain. So their complaints aren't taken as seriously. Or they're seen as being spoiled. Actually, they do have a higher tolerance for pain. Their complaints are seen as spoiled, or like they just can't handle it, not taken as seriously. So like there are ways to prevent. There has been like interventions done. We know what to do. So again, if like these numbers are going up, it's because there's an intentional neglect taking place of like, we just don't care about these women. That's it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And sadly, it's going to go up with the, changes that have been made to abortion here, where women aren't able to get the appropriate information about their pregnancies being dangerous, and have and will die because of it. So, yeah, pretty bleak. Hottest days on earth. Maternal mortality is doubling in the United States in the past 20 or so years. But here we go.
But like, did Elon Musk like buy something new? That's interesting.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he's maybe buying something to prepare for his cage match with Mark Zuckerberg.
Okay, I was gonna bring that up.
Please.
Like all these rich people. Well, it's just like these rich people. Do you think that they're just pretending they do martial arts, or do you think they really do martial arts?
Well, I don't know. The video I saw of Mark Zuckerberg looked like he might have some skills, but I don't know. I mean, this is I think a video he provided to the media.
The photos that we saw of Elon Musk, they were just photos of that guy Lex Friedman, who for some reason is like constantly being promoted into my Twitter feed, even though I do not follow him.
Sadly,
that made me laugh. Anyway, because I'm like, how do I know this guy actually does martial arts? They're like photos of him just like grabbing the other guy. Like I could do that and be like, look how good I am at jujitsu.
Hey, like, well, we'll find out maybe sooner rather than later in the octagon. Well, nonetheless, let's go ahead and move to our first story, and that is taking us to our neighbor to the south, the country of Mexico, that recently celebrated 5 years of the current president AMLO's term, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And we are very happy to be joined for this segment by a good friend of the show, Alina Duarte, independent journalist and researcher. Alina, thank you so much for being back with us.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Well, the pleasure is all ours, and I have to say, it was a little bit of a flashback to 2018 there, Alina, to see the Zocalo so filled with people. I remember we were actually both there in 2018, 5 years since AMLO has come into power. I mean, I know this is a big topic because it's 5 years, but I mean, maybe give us just an overview of some of his main points and what would, motivate so many people to come out and celebrate this anniversary.
Well, actually, last Saturday we saw a complete party for the anniversary of the so-called fourth transformation. Remember, the first transformation was the independence, the second one was the revolution, and the third one was the reform here in Mexico. So the fourth transformation starts not only in 2018, but years before when AMLO was also the candidate for presidency here in Mexico. But after a fraud in 2012, after Peña Nieto, who bought the presidency in 2012, finally, the 1st of July in 2018, AMLO won with more than 30 million votes after a so-called war on drugs, exactly the same as it happens in Colombia. So people were tired here in Mexico. I know that most of the people who voted for AMLO not only supported him as a candidate, but also as, the difference, or it was a complete change of the policy on drugs that Felipe Calderon used to have here in the country. So people were really tired about the other presidents after Vicente Fox, Salinas de Gortari, all these neoliberal presidents and terms before AMLO won 5 years ago. So what we saw, these images that now we are looking here, it was such a party. It was completely amazing just to be there with 250,000 people gathering from all over the country here in downtown. It was amazing. People were just not only celebrating the victory, but also just expecting for what's next in September the 6th, we are going to know who is going to be the candidate of Morena or of the so-called for transformation, who is going to succeed President AMLO. And that's when I was interviewing people in downtown here in Zocalo, they were saying like it doesn't matter who is the next candidate. We are here to build the fourth transformation. We already know, or that is the image of the government, that these are only the roots of the transformation. That after this so-called war on drugs, definitely we cannot end these effects of the neoliberalism here in Mexico, and also we cannot deny that there is a complete agenda for the next president in the country. So during the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of things. We've seen a lot of social programs. For example, one of each four Mexicans already has one social programs. It doesn't matter if they are youth or indigenous people or women. There are so many kind of social programs. There are specifically two that are like the main social programs of this government. That it's the youth building future, jóvenes construyendo el futuro. Like all the youth building the future through having their first job. It is an alliance with so many companies, or even in the state now they can get a job. And also there is another one specifically thinking in peasants population in Mexico, that it's sowing life. So around, I don't know how many people so far today in the so-called mañanera this morning conference of the president, he was saying that one of the things that he's just like thinking is that there are going to be more people with these social programs in the last year of his term. Next year we're going to have elections, presidential elections. So it's a complete change, and you know it by just watching the people in the streets celebrating, just supporting this president. Is one of the most popular presidents in Mexico in the whole history. So a lot of things have changed during these 5 years.
So, Alina, I just want to note to our viewers that we got to see you in Mexico a few months ago because me and Zoe Alexandra from People's Dispatch were able to sit down with Claudia Scheinbaum, who actually just stepped down as the head of government in Mexico City to run for to be the presidential candidate for the Morena Party ticket. And I think she's the front runner. So I recommend people go check that out at some point because it's a really good interview. However, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned like fourth transformation. You mentioned the popularity of AMLO. Just real quick, can you give like a brief overview of why this guy's so popular? Like there are really important progressive policies that he put in place, both when he was head of Mexico City, which is one of the reasons why he became so popular, but then also as president of the country, that have had an actual impact on the lives of working class and even middle class people as well, and poor people. So there is a reason he's so popular. Can you explain?
Well, actually, there are so many things that people were. I was interviewing people actually this last Saturday, and I was asking them like, why is important the fourth transformation for you, or if something changed in your life after AMLO became president in 2018, and they were like answering things like, I used to think so colonialist, and after the fourth transformation, now I know that things about sovereignty, about like deep answers. It's not only because I like AMLO and I like this government. Also, the social programs. I think it's so important. Now they are not only programs from the government. Now it's in the constitution. These programs are gonna continue over and over. It doesn't matter if it's AMLO or the for transformation. Now these programs are on the constitution. And it's pretty important for people. Also, like people were answering like this is the first time that a government asked me what I want, and they were referring, for example, to this when we were asking to the people. Well, the government asked if they wanted to AMLO. Relays in the government, this I don't know how to say this. The referendum that occurred last year, they were asking like, do you agree that AMLO continues in the government? So now they are part of this transformation. It's not only about what AMLO is saying or doing. They feel like they are part of this moment that we're living in Mexico. Also, for example, the international politics. It's so important to say that during the last governments, we didn't even know as a population, what was going on in the rest of the world, or we were just thinking about the relationship with the U.S. or Canada, about the NAFTA or things like that, and now people started like seeing or watching in these mañaneras, in these conferences of AMLO, or even, for example, it was so hard just to see that people were shocked when Nicolas Maduro was here last year. For people it was like, okay, maybe it's not a dictatorship in Venezuela when AMLO invites Nicolas Maduro, or why we are having here Evo Morales. So in the international discussion now, people are saying like, okay, Mexico is important not only inside the country but also outside. It has this government has around 60% of support between the population, but not only Mexicans in Mexico, also Mexicans in the U.S., Mexicans in another country. I don't know if you saw these images when AMLO went to the White House in several times with Donald Trump and also with Joe Biden. Maybe thousands of Mexicans just arrived to the White House, to Washington, D.C., just to support the president. And this is something that we never see before AMLO. So it's a complete change. And that was an answer of a woman I interviewed this Saturday. Like, why it's important for you, this government, this fourth transformation. And she was saying like, this is the first time that a president asked us or like consider us to be part of the politics. And I think it's exactly the same with the people who migrate after neoliberalism in Mexico, just to make them go away to the U.S. Specifically. Mexicans in the U.S. feels that they are part also of this moment all the time. AMLO is naming them. He's always saying that part of this economy, part of the economy in Mexico is also because of the migrants, of our Mexicans in the U.S. So I think a lot of a lot of things have changed. That there are so many reasons why people really love Andrés Manuel. It's not only about, for example, restitution of indigenous land. It also happened during this last 5 years. I don't know. I think like women, youth, all of people have so many reasons to support the actual administration.
Well, one of the things you mentioned a couple times here, AMLO's daily press conferences, which are quite something for those who don't know anything about them. And a recent one, I have to say, he revealed what was quite frankly a fascinating piece of information, and it was about what Mexico has been doing in El Salvador and also in Honduras, where they're helping small farmers to, do their thing, earn their livelihood. And it was showing that in the counties or the regions of the two countries where they had been helping, the number of migrants had just dropped. The bottom had fallen out, like I think 50-some% in Honduras, 31% in El Salvador. I know you have looked into this. You've reported on this. Talk to us about what exactly they're doing, because it seems like this is a really groundbreaking effort there in Central America.
Yeah, actually, these social programs, specifically two of them, Youth Building the Future and Sowing Life, they are not reaching only one in for Mexicans, but also they are reaching 2,000 people in Honduras and 2,000 people in El Salvador. But also, actually, in recent days, the president even announced that these programs would be reaching 5,000 peasants in Cuba. So we are talking that not only he's not actually we are waiting because of what's going on in Haiti. Supposedly it was gonna also work with Haiti in these programs, but I mean it has been almost impossible just to coordinate this kind of aid. He was trying to say, AMLO was saying like there was an obstacle, a clear obstacle in the case of Haiti. Also in Belize, he went last year, May last year, he visited Belize, Cuba, Honduras, El Salvador, to just to in this just to establish these programs, and now it's almost 30,000 people who are benefited with these programs. What they are doing is, for example, with the peasants, they are helping them, they are paying them. Actually, it's like a kind of salary just to maintain them sowing their lands instead of just migrating. With the youth, it's exactly the same. They are collaborating. They have a kind of cooperations with a lot of companies in Central America or even here in the south of Mexico specifically. I mean, the rest of the country too, but specifically in the south of Mexico. So what they're doing is just like to promote this collaboration with these companies so youth can be there also with a salary that is the minimum wage. Also, the company pay a part of it, so they have a job that it doesn't cost to the company at all. So the government is paying a part of their salary. So it's exactly the same that they are doing in Honduras, in El Salvador, and now in Cuba. So I think it's amazing. I mean, I never thought at the beginning of this government 5 years ago that solidarity could be this strong as it is now, specifically with peoples, not only with governments. This is also AMLO went to Guatemala. It's not that all of these governments are leftist, specifically Bukele or whatever, but I think that the government is now helping the people in these countries, and it's going I think it's pretty successful. As you said, Eugene, the numbers of migration have decreased amazingly. It's not only about expectations, now it's a reality. These social programs are really working nowadays.
And Alina, to build on what you're talking about, because you're mentioning so much of the region, I also think, like, aside from the issue of migration and how that's changed under AMLO, what about when we do talk about the rise of leftist or more progressive governments and Mexico being a part of that fold? Why is that so significant for Mexico to be a part of that group of countries of progressive and more left-leaning governments?
Well, actually, it's interesting because I would like to say that AMLO is only part of leftist organizations in the region, but also it's part of the Pacific Alliance, that it was created specifically to go against the CELAC, to go against all of these governments. And now you have Gabriel Boric that in the region it's not having a real foreign policy to the left. But AMLO has been so intelligent. I'm impressed by how he has been managed all of this foreign policy. All of these 5 years, I think he has been radicalized his policy in foreign policy. I think that, for example, his speech when it was the anniversary of Simon Bolivar in 2021, it was just amazing. He was saying like, okay, we cannot fight with the U.S., but we need to reconsider the alliances that we are having in the region. And he went against the OAS. Now our ambassador, I love our ambassador to the Mexican ambassador to the OAS. She told Almagro, like, you are hypocritical, you are the worst in the region. Like, he went just straight. I remember that was our job as a journalist. But now is the Mexican ambassador to the OAS, the one who is just going against and frontally to Almagro. And AMLO has only not he has not only given asylum to Evo Morales or even to Pedro Castillo. I know it wasn't possible at all, but his family is here in Mexico City. He has just making several alliances even with the U.S. I know that it's not something new. For example, also Lázaro Cárdenas, president in the 40s, 50s, after the Second World War, we had a different foreign policy with the U.S. specifically because the U.S. needed our resources after the Second World War. But I mean, there has been a lot of changes in the relationship with the U.S. So now AMLO is like, okay, we are just continue with our alliance with the NAFTA, the new NAFTA, and also we are gonna make these social programs possible, like Youth Building the Future or So in Life in Honduras, in El Salvador, in Cuba. He for example, condecorate with the maximum distinction, I don't know how to say it, to the president of Cuba, Miguel Diaz Canel. And I mean, to be honest, I didn't think 5 years ago that it was possible. He strengthened the relationship with Cuba, with Central America, with Xiomara Castro, with Lula da Silva, with Gustavo Petro. I remember in his morning conference when Petro won, he put salsa, cumbia to celebrate that Gustavo Petro was the new president. So it was, it's something really new for even for me, that I was all the time just saying like our councilors, our presidents, they were leading. For example, the last administration was leading the group of Lima against Venezuela, and now it's completely different 5 years after the group of Lima. So I think for AMLO has been really important, and also he during the university he studied a lot the case of Salvador Allende in Chile. So I think that's a pretty important reason that he knows, he's aware of the relationship with the region, and he's going. Actually, AMLO, he doesn't used to travel a lot. He's not the chancellor is the one who used to go to another country's events, etc. But the next September he's going to Chile to the 70th anniversary of the assassination of Salvador Allende. These are the kind of things that make me feel that he's really aware of the situation in the region, the alliances that he has to make, even if it's Gabriel Boric now in the presidency. Of course, that is pretty important for the left in Latin America, that he is in Chile in September. And I mean, I didn't expect this, but I'm so happy that this administration really takes the importance that he's aware in the region. Now he's leading a change also in foreign politics here in Mexico.
Well, Alina, as always, we really appreciate you coming on and helping us sort through all of these different, very important issues. And it will be quite interesting to see how the fourth transformation continues to evolve here in the next months. But as always, thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Well, thanks for having me again. It's always such a pleasure to be with you, comrade. So my pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Pleasure is all ours at all times.
At all times.
You're not following Alina Duarte, you should be. She's on all the social media platforms, one of the great independent journalists there in Mexico. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Alina is... No, that's the first time I heard you say that like that. Like, it's our pleasure at all times. I like that as like a tagline. Freedom Side, it's our pleasure at all times. I do love Alina. And, before we go to our next story and our next guest, I realized that we did forget in all the conversation we were having in the beginning, we forgot to mention something super important, Eugene.
Yes.
Totally slipped our minds. And that is the fact that for those who are watching and enjoy Breakthrough News and enjoy this show and dispatches and Eugene's seminars, you can access exclusive content at Breakthrough News by becoming a patron at patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can also donate on YouTube while you're watching live, which is another cool way you can support the show. Though I really encourage you to become a patron for the fun exclusive content. And then also, I want to berate our audience for a moment. Not as bad as usual, you guys.
I understand.
However, there are 163 people watching, but I only see 124 likes. So someone is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that is to like the show. And the reason I say this is because it helps us in the algorithm.
Yes. Well, thank you for that reminder. That powder explosion at the beginning really threw us off. But don't forget patreon.com/breakthrough news. And shout out to Sean Burke, who made a donation here in YouTube, wherever you may be. Sean, thanks so much. Really appreciate you. And everyone who's donated to become a patron, patreon.com/breakthrough news. So we're going to move into our next story here. Jesus Christ.
It's that powder. It's that powder. White House powder explosion.
Wow. We're good. This is going the whole show, I think.
You got to go back to the beginning
back.
if you want to know where it started. There's no going back.
Well, Congress is, speaking of Washington, D.C., in the throes of the discussion around the Farm Bill, the second largest piece of legislation that comes before Congress on a regular basis and touches on everything relevant to the food you eat here in the United States. And to discuss more about this bill, which is probably under-discussed in my view, we are very happy to be joined here by Jennifer Fahey, who is the communications director for Farm Aid. Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're very happy to have you here. And I guess maybe the best place, I think, to start is for those who maybe have no idea what the Farm Bill is or what's in it. And I know there's a lot in it, but maybe you could just give us some sort of basic pillars of what is being discussed and what the scale of it is.
Well, the scale is huge. This bill touches every one of us. And as you say, it should be more discussed. It is extremely under-discussed in terms of how much impact it has on each of us in our everyday lives. So it covers everything from nutrition programs like SNAP and school food to climate, like farm production methods, which goes to climate change, which we're going to get into, I think. It goes to the kinds of services that the U.S. Department of Agriculture can give to farmers in terms of farm credit and programs that help them on their farms. It goes to energy use. It goes to forestry. It goes to really cool, innovative programs that are coming out with each farm bill, which, by the way, happens only every 5 years. So every 5 years, we get this chance to really impact this really important legislation that probably we don't think about as much as we actually utilize it, given that we eat at least 3 times a day usually. So there is a new farm bill coming this year, hopefully. This bill is often late because of its size. But it often is a priority of both parties to really pass and put in place in time. When it doesn't get passed by the deadline, which is September 30th, it ends up in a lot of problems. A lot of programs get suspended. There isn't funding. Farmer applications for programs get put on hold. It creates a big old mess. And particularly as we're moving into an election year, we really do hope that that momentum is there from both parties to move forward and get this bill passed, and not just passed for sake of passage, but really to, we hope, create some real change in our food and farm system.
Well, so I know there's like so many different parts of this bill. It's like massive, like you said. And of course, there's a lot of lobbying taking place behind the scenes for various parts of this bill, of course, from like agribusiness. And we can get into that in other big industries as well. However, since you mentioned SNAP, let's start there for a moment. What's happening around SNAP in this bill? I mean, you know, usually Congress is always trying to cut SNAP, but of course the benefits for SNAP, I think, increased because participation increased during COVID, but now we're not in a COVID emergency anymore. So how is that playing out in conversations around this bill, and what may happen as a result of the constant desire to cut SNAP?
Yeah, great question. That's something that a lot of food and farm groups are really concerned about, and we're seeing it already. We're seeing it sort of what's playing out right now at the 2024 appropriations around agriculture is giving us a preview of what we're going to see in the Farm Bill. And that's that one party is very focused on just slashing spending everywhere. We know who that party is. And then we have another party that really is excited about using this Farm Bill as a chance to do what I think the Farm Bill was originally intended to do. The first Farm Bill was passed in 1933 in the wake of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. So it was a bill to help support farmers who were struggling and people, eaters, who were also struggling to afford food, as well as to address the Dust Bowl, this disaster. We have our own disaster right now, climate change. So, there's a lot of parallels there. And if we think about the Farm Bill really being that mechanism to help us address some huge challenges, then there's a lot of opportunity there. Unfortunately, we are seeing that, nutrition, the biggest chunk of the Farm Bill, is being attacked. The Republicans want to slash that budget line item. And the reality is that SNAP is one of the most beneficial federal programs out there. What those dollars do when they're invested in people who invest them in their communities has this multiplier effect that really impacts a lot of local communities. So this isn't just an entitlement program. This is a program that's doing rural and urban development. Another big thing is, historically, we've seen the Farm Bill as this handshake between nutrition and agriculture, sort of code words for urban and rural. The reality is now we have a huge hunger issue in rural communities too, and that's based on the disinvestment we've had over decades in rural communities. And that's also a disinvestment in independent family farmers, because they are at the center of the economic engine of rural communities. And when we see farmers being pushed off the land, we see rural communities suffering, hospitals closing, schools closing, local banks and businesses closing. So it's all connected. Unfortunately, we are going to see that extreme split between the two parties. But hopefully, we're going to see some reconciliation there and some good movement moving forward. I would say that people are feeling optimistic that we have that momentum going into this Farm Bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the other issues, and I'm glad you brought up the challenges that are facing so many family farmers, because I think for a lot of people who aren't from, farm country, the way they sort of think about the Farm Bill, they maybe hear something about crop insurance, they hear something about commodity payments, and the perception is huge sums of money are going to farmers. And I think most people, when they think of farmers, think of small family farmers, but we know that there's also this other side of it, that small family farmers seem to be the people struggling the most in terms of our food production system. So what's going on with these various payments that farmers are either getting or not getting or eligible for? Because I think the popular perception versus the reality there is very different.
Well, yes, I think that's right. The popular perception is right in the sense that the majority of the money is going to large-scale farmers who are doing pretty okay. And there's, I want to bring racial equity into this, because that's one of our Farm Aid's priorities for this Farm Bill and every Farm Bill. We have in our country a history of discrimination and racism, and that exists as well at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Historically, Black farmers and farmers of color and women farmers and Native farmers have been prevented from accessing the same kinds of programs and payments and services that are available to white farmers. There were huge headlines when Donald Trump created a program called the Market Facilitation Program, which was in response to a pain that he brought on himself by going after China in the trade wars. And that program doled out $12 billion. And afterwards, a review of that program found that 99.4% of that money went to white male farmers, who were typically middle class, upper middle class, wealthy farmers. So we have a problem here, right? We know our agricultural system from the beginning has been built in a way that preferences white male farmers, and we have a lot of work to do. And so that's why we want to see racial equity and equity centered in this farm bill. We have a lot of work remaining to do to make sure that our farm programs, which are absolutely critical, these are not handouts to farmers, but really support for farmers who are doing incredibly hard work putting food on all of our tables every day. But that support needs to be more equally shared among all kinds of farmers, particularly new and beginning farmers who haven't necessarily had the opportunity to have land passed down to them and all that infrastructure that comes with farming that is essential to having people get started on the land. So that's one of the major things we want to see change is making sure that we have that equity and we have those programs in place to support small scale farmers and not just the large scale farmers that people tend to think about when they think of farmers.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that for a moment in terms of the sort of like massive agricultural companies. And what does a bill like this mean for those companies? I can imagine that like agribusiness is like lobbying massively to get as much funding as they can, while you're talking about these like small scale farmers that don't get as much. And maybe like, I think there was some statistics on your website that you guys have like kind of showing how the amount of land for smaller farmers has decreased and the amount for like these bigger industries has increased. So there's that, but like, why does that matter? Why should the average American care if these big, companies are eating up more and more land for what they're doing while smaller farmers are going out of business?
We believe we need a diversity of farmers on the land. It comes back to our democracy. We want to see our land in the hands of many. We want to see our food in the hands of many. I think COVID, the pandemic, really gave us a great example of how our food system and the way it is so extremely concentrated can fail us, right? We saw those supply chains just crumble overnight. And many of us look to our local food systems, our local farmers, to find that safe and steady food supply that we could rely on when our grocery store shelves were empty. So, it's kind of simple, but you're right. I mean, it's hard for people to grasp. And particularly now, as more and more of every market gets gobbled up by big corporations, it becomes sort of like, okay, yeah, the reality, right? The status quo. But when we're talking about something like our food, it is so important that we have that level of diversity, that level of ownership by many, so that we're not just seeing our land gobbled up by one major corporation that's going to maybe farm in a way that isn't good for the land. I mean, one of the things that we're really focusing on right now is climate change, both in the ways that climate change impacts family farmers, who are now seeing that 100-year disaster each and every year, right? And so how do they stay on the land? How do they face the day-to-day challenges of farming, in addition to having these extreme weather events that come in and wipe out everything they've worked for? And we need those farmers to provide our food for us, and they're dealing with this extra challenge at the same time as dealing with climate change impacts. They're also probably our best solution on climate change. Farmers can farm in ways that actually help us put carbon in the soil and mitigate climate change impacts for all of us. So that's a major focal point for a lot of farm groups, including Farm Aid right now. Let's make sure that these farmers are able to survive and stay in business and stay on the land, so that they can then put these practices into place that are going to help all of us by creating more resilient land, helping to bring that carbon back into the soil, and helping to mitigate the overall impact of climate change on all of us.
Well, Rania, I know you're tired of hearing me say this, but of course I am from Charlottesville, Virginia, so we know a lot about Farm Aid and the important work that you do to stand in the gap for so many farmers. So for those who are maybe just hearing about this, where can they find your organization and more about what you're doing, both education and to advocate for farmers?
Definitely check out farmaid.org. There's lots of information. There's our Farm Bill 101. So if you really want to get wonky, you can dive into each title of that bill and learn more and dig in more. And we are best known, perhaps not for our wonkiness, but for our annual festival, which has been pretty close to Charlottesville and features a very famous Charlottesville resident, Dave Matthews. So our annual festival will be coming up soon. We hold it, we move it around the country. We hold it each fall, and we'll be announcing that information soon. So hopefully you can join us at one of those too. It's an incredible day celebrating the people that we exist to support, family farmers, and the good things that they bring all of us.
Mm-hmm. Great event, great organization. Jennifer, thank you so much for being willing to join us here on the Freedom Side.
Always, at all times.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Farmaid.org, everyone. You gotta check it out. It's a great concert they have. Willie Nelson, of course, founded Farm Aid, for those who don't know, in the mid-1980s in the midst of a massive crisis for America's family farmers. Farmers were marching on Washington. Willie Nelson and a number of other, I think Neil Young might have been at that first one, a number of well-known musicians came together to hold this big concert, Farm Aid, to raise money, and it's been institutionalized into an organization that now works 365 days a year to help farmers. And of course, they're there every year. Dave Matthews, who also, of course, as we mentioned, lived in my hometown of Charlottesville, plays a big role now in Farm Aid. But definitely all the information you get everyone about the Farm Bill is there. And there's a lot of great ways that even if you live in the concrete jungle, that you can act to help and to support farmers in this country.
Yeah. I'm all for farmers. I'm all for farmers. They do the hard work and they grow our
Your first
food,
choice was Virginia Tech, so I know you like rural areas.
We don't need to tell people this. There's nothing wrong. Also, there's nothing wrong. I don't even know why you're making fun of me for that. You
Hokey high, tech VPI. I'm not making fun of you. No, I'd shout out to Blacksburg.
It's like UVA supremacy. It's like Charlottesville supremacy that you're
Well, imposing. I mean, listen, the fact that we are superior to Virginia Tech is no slight to Virginia Tech.
How quick Eugene is to get you could turn Eugene. This sounds almost nationalistic, honestly. It's not becoming of a leftist.
Well, I mean, listen, I've left George Mason alone all this time, so just, allow me.
Jesus Christ. I am not going to participate in the devaluation of my Virginia-ness, which you think is so much less than whatever you are.
Listen, I love a good Lane Stadium football game. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay. I think we should move on because
I think we should move on. It's okay. We're going to go to another critically important story in terms of policy here in the United States, and that's tax policy and some of the dodgy things going on with it. We are very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Matthew Gardner, who's a senior fellow at the Institution on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP. Mr. Gardner, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we were very happy to have you. You were one of the authors of a very interesting new report, June 29th, Corporations Reap Billions in Tax Breaks Under Bonus Depreciation. Now, most people hear bonus depreciation, it's like, what could that possibly be? But you have laid out exactly what it's being used for and what it is. But maybe just give us a sense, how much money are these corporations able to avoid paying in taxes because of this? Maybe first off, and then what is bonus depreciation?
So the headline finding from our new report is that in the first 5 years of the Trump corporate tax laws, 2018 to 2022, just 25 of the very largest and most profitable corporations have collectively saved $67 billion in taxes through accelerated depreciation, through this one feature of our corporate tax law. We are measuring this 5-year period because it was the Trump tax cuts of 2017 that introduced this feature. And what bonus depreciation is the idea is this. If you're a company and you buy a piece of machinery, you're supposed to be able to write off the cost of that machinery during its productive life. So maybe you got a machine that lasts 20 years. Well, you're supposed to be able to use that cost gradually to reduce your income in sort of a linear way over that period. Accelerated depreciation, which has been around in some form or another for a few decades now, lets you write off these costs faster. Immediate expensing which is what's in effect right now as a result of the Trump tax cuts, lets these companies write off the whole thing immediately in year one. A huge immediate tax savings for any company that buys any capital equipment, invests in anything long term. And so the two things we know are that the benefits from this tax break are hugely concentrated in the hands of just a very small number of the biggest, most profitable corporations, and that by and large, the tax breaks these companies are getting, again, $67 billion for just 25 companies, are by and large basically being given to these companies not as a way of changing their behavior, but for rewarding them for what they were going to do in the first place, right? We know that you can't, if you're a manufacturer, you need manufacturing equipment to do what you do. Any of these businesses, whether it's utilities or tech companies, they're making these investments because they have to stay in business. And so the notion that they wouldn't do it if we didn't give them money to do so is ludicrous on its face.
Yeah, and so you guys find in this report that that this comes out to about these companies started paying an effective federal corporate tax rate of 12.2% since 2018, under what you just described, which is below the statutory rate of 21%. So I mean, they're basically just like getting out of paying. And I mean, these aren't like little companies. These are big companies. We're talking Verizon, Amazon, Disney. There's already so many tax loopholes these companies get out of, as just to start off with. And then of course, like, you compare this to the average person, especially like working people or even working poor people who, like, when they, apply for the child tax credit, sometimes they like don't even get it, or they end up getting audited as a result, whereas these companies get away with all this. So it really is outrageous. I'm just laying all that out because it's like, when you look at that number, it's just like the unfairness of it all really strikes you. But that said, your report also says that this policy is set to wind down starting this year, but would or could be extended. Can you explain what that means? Like, is this going to be extended? Or is there a bipartisan split on this policy, or does everybody support it?
Sure. Well, yeah, the reason we're talking about this right now is that while between 2018 and 2022, companies could take advantage of this full expensing, starting in 23 and ending in 2026, the benefit of full expensing is scheduled to gradually go away. And I think it's fair to say that the Republicans in Congress and President Trump, when they enacted this, never intended for this phase out to take effect. The point was to do it permanently while making it appear less expensive than it was. This is a trick that Congress has been playing repeatedly on us, especially from the Republican side, since the Bush administration did it in 2001. You try to fit 2 pounds of sugar in a 1 pound bag by passing a permanent tax cut, but making it magically disappear after 10 years. Well, and the expectation is that after 10 years, Congress isn't going to allow taxes to go up dramatically, which is the way they'll describe it. So they'll continue this. So I think the expectation, certainly on the Republican side, is that this really is a permanent tax cut that just, needs to be made so. There's more resistance on the side of Democrats. Sensibly, Democrats in both houses have pointed to the far more pressing needs, like the child tax credit expansion that you mentioned a moment ago. And of course, deficit reduction, which Republican lawmakers have said they want to prioritize, is a casualty of this as well. So, Democrats are identifying other things they'd rather do. But I think it's fair to say that I think it's a fair criticism to say that there is too little skepticism on either side of the political spectrum among lawmakers towards this idea that big multinational corporations absolutely have to be given these incentives to engage in capital investment, or else they just won't do it. We've been way, way too believing. I think we as a nation, and certainly Congress as a set of lawmakers, when companies make these veiled threats that they'll leave or stop manufacturing things if we don't give them tax breaks. And this is a case where I think both sides of the legislature really need to develop a little bit of skepticism and ask are we really getting anything for our money when we do these tax breaks?
I think it's a crucial question on so many different fronts. And another issue in this that's in your report that I thought was really interesting, obviously inflation is affecting, the average working family massively right now. We're all dealing with it. But one of the things you all outline is how the way these tax breaks are structured, in a way, big corporations can, to a degree, use inflation to their advantage to some degree. Could you explain that aspect?
How they can use inflation to their advantage. Sorry, I might have missed that point.
No, sorry. How is sort of by deferring a tax payment.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, you're good.
So to some extent, because with depreciation, you're obviously allowed to write the cost of this machinery off over time, and companies are instead writing them off immediately. That is the main benefit of this. These companies are getting a tax break now that in theory they would be able to get eventually. But the time value of money is so great, and that these companies are very much in favor of this right now. And in particular, for companies like Verizon or Amazon in particular, for whom making capital investments, it's just so central to the way they do business. Certainly for the big utilities, they can keep piling these depreciation tax breaks on top of each other. And as a result, just the act of accelerating the tax breaks is providing them in inflation adjusted terms with much bigger tax breaks than they would otherwise get. So yeah, inflation is definitely these companies' friend. But I think even leaving that aside, the real question is, why do we need to give tax breaks of this side at all? Forget about the timing. We need to reevaluate why we're spending so much of our budget, and we are spending money, we just don't count it that way, in reducing corporate income taxes like this. It's as I said, I think we've just been giving these companies way too much deference when they say they absolutely must have these things.
Mm-hmm.
Is there is there lobbying happening behind the scenes, or is this just kind of like a natural inclination of Republicans in Congress? I mean, I would imagine if I was a company, I was saving this much on having to pay taxes, I would spend a little money to make sure it continued.
Yeah. Certainly there's been, since the day after the 2017 tax cuts were signed, the lobbying has been going on behind the scenes to make these tax cuts, which were on their face temporary, into permanent tax cuts. We know that started like January 1st of 2018. And, to their credit, the business lobbyists who are engaging in this they're very good at their job. More often than not, they've been able to scare lawmakers into believing that if they don't get these things, the sky is going to fall. And while they're not doing it in public, we know from the work of campaign finance outfits like Common Cause and Public Campaign that these companies and the lobbies that represent them are spending a phenomenal amount of money and time working behind the scenes to get these things done. And of course, the downside is that there simply isn't as much money or as much lobbying power lined up behind the sensible questions one might ask about, can we really afford these things? What are the alternatives? What are the alternative things we could be doing with this money as a nation, other than giving companies tax breaks for doing what they're probably going to do anyway? But yeah, no question, this has been a big, big topic of behind the scenes discussion on Capitol Hill for about 5 years now.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we let you go, let folks know where they can find this report and the other work coming from ITEP. You guys produce a lot of great reports on tax policy.
Sure. Our website is www.itep.org. That's ITEP.org. And we tweet at ITEP Tweets on Twitter.
Easy to find. Matthew Gardner, Senior Fellow at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. People often ask me, Rania, where I find a lot of information that I drop on shows like this. And I'll say I am always on the ITEP website. I mean, they do unbelievable reports about how corporations are avoiding taxes, and also the impact of a lot of these tax breaks. Things that you wouldn't even think about, like why sales tax holidays aren't what they sound like. Sounds good to us in general, but it's really not as good as it looks. So yeah, I would say it's important for a regular visit if you want to be informed on how your money's being spent, misspent, and how the system's being gamed.
Definitely, definitely. And it's just like so outrageous too, because, I tried to apply for that tax break. Didn't work. I was like, what is it called? Accelerate. I was like, I checked the box for accelerated depreciation. They were like, nope, not going to happen.
You haven't bought any capital equipment this year.
Yeah.
Things I don't
I
know
was like,
about
what is
your business life
happening?
in Lebanon. A lot of capital equipment expenses for Rania there.
Could you imagine?
Paving
Could you
roads, chip fabs.
It's costly. It's costly equipment. I had to get this crane. Like,
Yeah, that would
on a
count.
crane.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. They did some good similar things on the CHIPS Act and like the way subsidies are used. So yeah, worth watching, worth checking out. But honestly, blew my mind to read this $67 billion for nothing, basically. But that's where we are. That's where we are.
That's America. Dude, that's the American dream. By the way, that's like, that on our country, the week of our country's birth, this was the 4th of July. So I feel like it's one of the perfect things to be talking about because, as you know, Eugene, one of the reasons that America became independent.
Yes.
They didn't want taxation without representation.
I think the difference is that you're represented in Congress. They weren't represented in Parliament. But you could argue that, yes, we are poorly represented in Congress, which is controlled by the billionaires in Wall Street. And there is some parallels. There's some parallels.
Please don't take me seriously.
I won't.
But no,
the taxes were unfair. That's the thing they were concerned about, and the taxes are also unfair now. So you're on the right path. You're there.
Same thing.
Yeah, well, happy belated 4th of July, everyone. Hopefully
it's one of those. Listen, it's one of those days where like I'm gonna make a lot of stupid jokes. I think anybody who's been watching the live stream since we started already knows. However, before we move on to the next topic that you and I are going to talk about, that started with the big powder explosion. Before we move on to the next topic, though, I want to take the opportunity once again to remind everybody that you can help support Breakthrough News by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where on top of being a supporter of Breakthrough News and helping us grow, you also get access to exclusive content, including the second half of my show, Dispatches. And Eugene does a monthly seminar in Africa that is excellent. And we've got more stuff planned. Very, very exciting. So also, if you don't like Patreon for some reason, you can also do a one-time donation on YouTube. And we're always, happy for the support. I want to encourage our audience to continue to share this episode as it's live, after it's live. Make sure you've liked it if you haven't. It helps us in the algorithm. We're always up against the algorithmic monster. Yeah. And that's my little spiel, Eugene, on what people should be doing with their lives. And that is becoming patrons of Breakthrough News.
Indeed. Patreon.com/Breakthrough News. You won't regret it. I promise you.
You won't.
You won't regret
it.
You
won't. We have testimonials.
Do we?
I became a patron of Breakthrough News, and I don't regret it.
Yeah.
That's going to be the testimonial we share.
Well, I would definitely share that. That's certainly good. Don't forget you can donate right below this screen here on YouTube right now. But we want to turn the page here. We wanted to check in, if you will, Rania, on the Ukrainian counter offensive that's allegedly going on now. As you may or may not have heard, it doesn't seem to be going all that great. It seems to be pretty stalled. But all you see in the U.S. media is basically just that it's happening, that Ukraine's doing like basically okay, even though it's not going as well as they wanted, and that somehow, some way, even though it's basically going okay, they need more money and more weapons. I believe there's a new $300 million package being discussed, I think, in the United States. Spain, big spenders, sending 4 tanks to Ukraine. That's
gonna be a game changer.
I just thought, like, wow, like, what's the point of even doing it at this point? But anyway, and obviously, a number of ongoing issues in terms of where the war is going to go, when is it going to end, is there going to be peace? I mean, obviously, we're in a global cost of living crisis that's being caused by the war. So anyway, we just wanted to try to give people a sense of what's really going on vis-a-vis this Ukrainian counteroffensive. So I want to start by showing like a big map, Rania, of like the whole Ukraine and the area that is, controlled by Russia, part of Russia in some countenances or whatever. And this map that we want to bring up here is from not a breakthrough news source, it's the Institute for Study of War. So like pro-Ukraine, so I'm not pulling from some Russian propaganda.
Robert Kagan propaganda.
Couldn't be more neocon than this.
There you go.
So you see those areas in red that are shaded there? Those are the areas that are, well, again, depending on who you ask, either controlled by Russia, part of Russia now because of the votes that took place, the broad part of eastern Ukraine. But what I think is notable, Rania, about this map is that despite all of this Ukrainian counteroffensive, Ukraine's doing great, this map has basically looked exactly the same for like 6 straight months, maybe even longer than that. I mean, it's basically like there's been almost no change in the front line since the middle of 2022. And somehow the narrative in the U.S. media is somehow that the war is winnable, that Ukraine is doing well, that the money that's being put in is a good, amount of money. But yet and still, again, you look at that red there, that's the area where Russia is in control, has not really, and if you're wondering, that little bit of blue is allegedly where there's partisan activity for the Ukrainians. But basically it has not changed at all for almost the entirety of the past, 6 to 9 months. I didn't go back to check, but that's what I always think about. ISW puts these out every single day, basically, and we'll see some more of the maps they have to give you more of a sense of what's going on. But every single day, basically, it never changes, but the spin on their tweets is always basically like, things are going really great for Ukraine and really bad for Russia.
It's funny because, before we started recording, as I was looking at looking through, perusing like what the media is saying about this particular topic, the Western press, I just think it's worth reading a couple headlines.
Please.
Because it really shows. Okay, so one is Ukraine counteroffensive will be long and bloody, says U.S. General Mark Milley. Okay, long and bloody. I mean, it's been over a year. Like that. Okay, yes, that is correct. It's going to be long and bloody. That's then, Ukraine war, the lethal minefields holding up Kiev's counteroffensive. So like that's blaming the fact that Russia has massive minefields. That's making it harder for Ukraine to win. That's the BBC, the Washington Post. This is my favorite. Ukraine's top general wants shells, planes, and patience. So it's just like you read these headlines and it's clear that there's it's like there's not even trying anymore. They're just like, yeah, it's going to be long and bloody and Ukrainians are going to continue to die. Looking at this map, it's unwinnable. It's unwinnable. It's unsustainable. Here's another one. Reuters, Ukraine right to be cautious with counteroffensive, top NATO official says. It's just like you can sense the fact that like they're all very well aware. It's either Ukraine begging for more weapons, some Western country saying we're going to give them more weapons, or like some media outlet headline that's justifying why nothing has changed and why it's just going to continue to be bloody and horrible. Because that's just the way it is and it has to be. So like at this point, it's like, okay, if nothing's changing, the only thing that's changing is that more Ukrainians and Russians are dying. Like, what is the point of a war where nobody's ever going to win?
No, that's a good point.
Other than, we understand that that's what the U.S. wants, right? They want to like bleed Russia to the last Ukrainian, but like Russia's still standing. I mean, they survived an apparent rebellion. I'm just joking. I'm not going to call it that. But no, like it's like Russia's still standing. It's still, for now, it's economically prospering. The world is becoming more multipolar. There's an increasingly there's this rise of this economic bloc that's outside of U.S. control as a result of U.S. policy in many ways. And meanwhile, it's like, what is NATO getting out of it and what is the U.S. getting out of it? I actually don't quite see it. And certainly Europe isn't getting anything out of it. Europe is actually like becoming weaker as a result of all this. Yeah.
Significantly weaker. And, it's going to go long and bloody, as you said, General Mark Milley. I think he's about to actually step down from the U.S. military. And I mean, obviously, you never really get much of a sense of what exactly is happening. There's a Washington Post article recently that was embedded in, or I don't know if they were embedded, but they were interviewing people from a Ukrainian unit that's a part of this offensive, which, by the way, has been going on since about mid-June. I think we have a screenshot that has a little paragraph from that. But the thing I really want to read to you, I don't know how big it is on people's screen, but it's the last paragraph. And it's talking about when they were out fighting. It says, there were fewer than 50 men in the unit, he said, and 30 did not return. They were killed, wounded, or captured by the enemy. 5 of the unit's armored vehicles were destroyed within the first hour. 50 men, 30 did not return. That's in one offensive. And the first half is about how he said we were left there in the field without tanks or heavy armor. We were shelled with mortars from 3 sides. We couldn't do anything. So I don't know the percentages there, but out of 50, 30 did not return, the vast majority. And so this is when you're hearing that it's stalled, that it's bloody, that it's this. I mean, these Ukrainian units who allegedly, according to the mainstream media, 9 times out of 10, these things are buried deep in the article, are like doing well when they're being decimated. And there's just real quick, another Washington Post screenshot that I think speaks to this and how badly, it's going here. If we have that and you can pull it up, it's from Graham Allison, who's an opinion columnist there, who was, doing some calculations about how long it would take Ukraine to take back all of the territory it's lost based on how they're going now. And he says, and again, this is a pro-Ukrainian columnist who's talking about how Ukraine needs to win. It's all good. But he says, to put the matter into perspective, today, Russia controls about 17% of the territory that was previously Ukraine's. If Ukrainian forces are no more successful in the weeks ahead than they have been so far, Ukraine will not recapture all of its territory for 16 years. That's how it's going in the counteroffensive.
Wow. Okay, so can I just counter what you just said?
Please.
With something that was recently said by Ukraine's top general.
Ready.
Which is that they just need shells, planes, and patience. I don't know why you can't understand. No, I mean, so all jokes aside, I mean, yeah, that's 30 of 50 people. So you have that's what kind of percentage of a survival rate is that? I can't do fast math.
I can't either, but it's high.
Not good. It is not good. That is a high rate of failure and death. And that sounds pretty horrendous. And at some point, you're just killing off by continuing this war. You're making sure that a significant portion of Ukraine's male population is going to just die.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
well, I think another point on that I want to note that came out today, and we want to bring up a couple things from the New York Times here, is the U.S. is now saying they're going to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine. Cluster munitions that are banned by about 120 nations. Really unbelievable here. I guess it's still to some degree expected, not 100% confirmed. I mean, of course, the United States, nor Russia for that matter, if you want to talk about it, ban cluster munitions. But they're sort of, even the countries have not banned them, people are so about using them because they are, so dangerous. It's a complicated thing, but basically what you have with cluster munitions are little bomblets. I actually think we have a screenshot explaining from the New York Times in this article why they're so bad. But it's basically you think of a big bomb, but one that sort of essentially breaks into a lot of little bombs, and then they go over a wide area. And they also have a really high failure rate too. So sometimes they don't really explode, and then they cause many problems later on because they're there in the ground for some times. But basically, cluster munitions are known for having a huge impact on civilians. And that's what this is here. Why are they so controversial? And by the way, the part just under this part of the article is, aren't these things illegal? But yeah, it's they're bomblets designed to explode or ignite upon hitting the ground. Historically, the failure rate is the highest among classes of weapons with lasting and often devastating consequences for civilians. According to humanitarian groups, a fifth or more of bomblets can linger, potentially to detonate when disturbed or handled years later. So the way they fall over this broad area hurts a lot of civilians. A lot of them don't work, which means that, kids That's really who's picking a lot of these things up. Will pick them up 10 years from now and blow their hands off. It's
Or die.
really one
Yeah.
of the sort of worst weapons. So like I said, I think it's 120 countries that have banned cluster munitions. But again, even the countries that have not banned them usually are relatively do not use them usually 9 times out of 10. Sometimes they do because they know that the backlash around using cluster munitions is pretty bad given it. But now, despite everything that's happening, the U.S. is giving them to Ukraine.
Well, it depends which country you are, of course, because, I'm talking to you from a country, Lebanon, that in 2006, just before like the ceasefire went into effect, after the Israelis invaded and then failed in southern Lebanon, the Israelis dropped 4 million cluster munitions across southern Lebanon. And until like years and years after, as soon as recently, every once in a while, like a kid, because they look like toys. They're very, very small. It looks like a toy, and a kid will be playing in like a field, and he'll pick it up and, like you said, blow their hands off. And then there's all these like NGOs that work to clear those kinds of munitions, which is useful and helpful, but it would be better if they just weren't used in the first place.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't cause problems years later.
Really unbelievable that's where we are. But that's where we're at, is the Ukraine counteroffensive basically stalled, units being mauled and decimated, armored vehicles being destroyed, very little progress being made. And rather than move towards peace, the U.S. is saying we're going to give you even more destructive weapons so you can not win, but create the maximum level of damage and devastation against Russia, which is all they care about, not the lives of Ukrainians. I'll also note here, Newsweek has a very interesting article that came out, I think yesterday, maybe earlier today, Bill Arkin, about the role of the CIA in Ukraine and how they're all in Ukraine. They're inside of the country. They're working. They're helping on a number of different fronts. So America directly involved in the conflict. It's a very, very interesting piece. That's a piece of it right there, a screenshot we have there. I'll read it to you. It says, the CIA has been operating inside of Ukraine under strict rules and with a cap on how many personnel can be in the country at any time. Black special operators are restricted from conducting clandestine missions, and when they do, it is within a very narrow scope. So I don't know how you're restricted, but then you can do it anyway. You're there under strict rules, but it also says in the article how the CIA can do things the military can't because military personnel are basically restricted from being in the country because they're trying to say the U.S. isn't involved. It's a very interesting article from Bill Arkin. It's a long article in Newsweek, but basically how the CIA is playing a massive role orchestrating this war, quite frankly, is the way he lays it out. The logistics networks, helping them with the training, convincing other countries to get more involved, actually trying to convince some other countries not to do too much. All these different pieces, this shadow game that's going on here. It's really quite something, I have to say. So
that is direct. That's direct U.S. involvement. Like it's a U.S. war. I mean, that's like, is that even a proxy war anymore? If you're just like talking about how openly, wow, that's dangerous. But we knew this is where we were because this has been going on. But I do love those contradictions.
Yes.
On the one, and also you guys can rest easy knowing there are restrictions and they are both involved and not involved at the same time.
Yes. Wild thing. Well, we're going to move on from the stalled Ukrainian counteroffensive here. Hopefully the war comes to an end sooner rather than later. We want to transition here to another issue that made big news over this past weekend and throughout this holiday. That was obviously a tragic mass shooting that took place last weekend in Baltimore. 2 people were killed, 28 were injured, and all the usual conversation has come in here. We are very honored to be joined here by Lawrence Grand Prix, who's the Director of Research at Leaders for a Beautiful Struggle, a grassroots think tank in Baltimore. Lawrence, thanks so much for being with us, man.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to start here because, of course, you've seen it, and Baltimore is sort of like the punching bag for the national media of, community violence, and it's always presented as this sort of mindless, people rampaging around sort of issue. I mean, so just give us, some of the analysis you all have about what is really behind community violence and why, when we see incidents like this, like why they're really happening.
That's a really good question. I think sometimes people adopt the early 90s gang narrative, which assumes a sort of hierarchical top-down competing over territory. That's not really what's happening here. A lot of different things are happening, but at core, obviously, you have material deprivation. You have the legacy of targeted hyper-incarceration. And so these are particular neighborhoods in Baltimore that have had generations and generations of people cycle in and out of jail, oftentimes for minor offenses, get hardened while in jail, lose their opportunity to connect to the mainstream economy, and you have this perpetual relationship to not just the drug economy, but all types of the black market economy, and the police don't enforce any contracts there. So just not to be a bad guy with a gun or wanting to kill people to survive, many people in the city carry guns. With the rise of so-called ghost guns, 3D printed guns, gun kits, they've become much more inexpensive. So people have an economic incentive to protect their investments if they're doing anything in any neighborhood that's rough related to carrying cash. So in that environment, with the shutdown, with the feeling that the institutions of the society have nothing for you and will abandon you, there's this increased sense of fear, anxiety, where relatively minor things in community, disputes over romantic relationships, disputes over money, or just people doing something wrong to someone you love, can result in violence. And I think, again, these folks are oftentimes deeply pathologized and dehumanized, but oftentimes, I mean, one could say it's an excess of humanity, an excess of caring about people in your community and knowing that no one else is going to defend them, that sometimes can lead to these instances. So we don't know the specific details of this shooting, but these are the sort of systemic and cultural analyses we use to try to interpret violence in Baltimore.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, of course, the narrative that we're seeing in the media, often going along with that is this like attempt to try to use it or invoke this sort of violence to say, oh, we need to increase funding for police. We need more police on the streets. So can you talk about why that is not the way to respond to this sort of violence by increasing police in Baltimore?
It's hard because I know we don't have a lot of time, but the studies are pretty conclusive at how inconclusive it is to simply increase funding and expect for police and expect that to decrease violence. So some cities have cut police budgets and seen a decrease in violence. Some cities have increased the police budget and seen an increase in violence. There's no correlation or causation there. Generally, what I've studied, especially young people believe police are stupid. So they believe no matter how many cops are around, they will not catch me. And if they catch me, they will not convict me because they cannot do police work. And they're correct. The war on drugs has taught an entire generation of cops how to not do the basic job that even many radicals understand, that if someone is a predator on a community, we have no alternative right now. It might make sense to put them in jail and make a case against them. They can't do that. So they continuously talk about increasing police patrols, putting more money into the police force, hiring more people to join the FOP as the solution to everything. But the reality is, if you are in a underground economy beef, you may not want to shoot somebody, but you can't be sure that they don't want to shoot you. So we have a similar thing of miscalculation that happens in international relations, where many times people don't want to commit violence, but the violence of jail is nothing compared to the violence of someone on the street. So this is a very sticky problem, but the one thing we know for sure is that putting more money into police takes more money away from grassroots investments in institutions working class black people control, cooperative economics, things that can actually get people not just an alternative way of making a living, but an alternative way of having a belief in the future. And until we invest in that and really give control to the community over those institutions, we're not going to see a systemic solution to this problem.
I think that there's so much in what you're saying. I mean, I oftentimes when I think about these things, I almost feel like that's almost the way they want it to be, because there's almost like when I lived in Baltimore briefly, as you know, and one of the things that always was so surprising to me, and I still see this now, is as soon as the weather gets nice, the one thing you're guaranteed to start seeing on the local news is there's a lot of young people down at the Inner Harbor, and even if nothing is happening, it's like a crime just to be young, black, and in a nice public area hanging out. And I just think if you're already criminalizing people before they do anything, is it the quote unquote crime that you're worried about, or to some degree are you just trying to contain the impacts of a situation that was created on purpose?
This is very important because the nonprofit industrial complex has realized that claiming to address black violence is a really effective hustle, because the critical thing to gentrify Baltimore is to get the murder rate down, or if not to get the murder rate down, create the perception that institutions controlled by capital can get the murder rate down. So the presence of young black people on the streets is a visual signal to people who have capital to invest that the people who I believe are profitable consumers don't want to be around that. So we have to get that under control. and that under control is the visual symbols of young Black people that scare away rich people, rich consumers, rich real estate investors. So not only is that rhetoric being used by the police, it's also unfortunately being used by many, I think, well-meaning, but nonprofits that many people on the left support, many people like us support, that claim to be using these public health approaches to violence prevention. And many of those people do very good work, but the institutions that dominate them, like Johns Hopkins University, are not those controlled by the people, and the methodologies they're using don't have any of this liberatory analysis in them. They see violence as a disease, and I think too often that means that the community is diseased. The people are infected by the disease of violence. So it's a very negative conception of the community that's being exercised by these public health experts. And this is becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry because capital can sell. I'm bringing in Harvard, I'm bringing in Hopkins. They're going to get the violence out like you cut out cancer. So unfortunately, we're kind of getting it from both sides here. And we just finished a report that we're going to release talking more about this dynamic, where the police and the nonprofit industrial complex see Black death as a commodity to be sold. And it's very hard to hear grassroots bottom-up solutions to the problem when that's the case.
Yeah, and of course, there's like not one thing. There's not one fix, right? Because this is like a collection of so many different issues in one. I mean, for the other place I think that gets beat up on a lot is like it's either Baltimore, especially in the summertime, or it's Chicago, or the south side of Chicago. It's either because like they'll, in the summertime there will be these shootings, and then it'll just be like, oh, like, and then all these different ways of dealing with, like you're saying, that are connected to profit, like that creates this NGO industrial complex where people are essentially benefiting, but. All of that said, if you were in charge in an ideal world, and this sounds like a silly question, but it's a good one, like what does need to happen to address this sort of thing? Go for it. Paint us a picture.
Yeah. So that's a question I'd love to come back and talk about more in depth at some other time. We address it in our report that's coming out in a few weeks. But cities around the country have done it. The problem is many people haven't heard of it, and that's not by accident, because they did it by challenging not just the police, but also the nonprofit industrial complex to put an ecosystem of community safety institutions in the hands of the community. So the example I'm pulling from is Newark, New Jersey. Newark, New Jersey cut their murder rate in half over the past 7 years. And it's been sustainable so far, the decrease in murder. And they've been very adamant that the coalition of grassroots organizations that they bring to the table, they are essentially empowered to run their violence prevention work, which includes, some of the stuff we all hear about, summer jobs for youth, employment opportunities, but they empower people who have a very particular vision of cultural work to actually talk to people about injected oppression, talk to people about the psychological violence that leaves Black people into internalized self-hatred, and in turn their self-hatred against each other because they can't turn it against the white people who dominate them. They have a very intentional pact, not just between a peace between the street organizations, but they're also demanding a peace between the corporate sector and the community, where the corporate sector stops discriminating against returning citizens and invests in community. So they've really taken what is, I think, a pro-social and necessary righteous indignation and oppositional complex that many young youth have that can lead them to violence, and they've turned that against the nonprofit industrial complex and pieces of capital in Newark. And that's been successful in a way that no other city has a validated record of cutting their murder rate in half like that. But that's Ras Baraka. Ras Baraka is not only not a friend of the neoliberals, he's also been someone who hasn't been always loved by the left. But the results are not really questionable. And so it gets to the point where we, who call themselves the left, have to have a real discussion about the anxiety sometimes people on the left have around Black people's sovereignty, and the sort of programmatic approaches they may take that may not fit perfectly within the leftist vision. But if they are successful for the Black community, then how do we actually talk about that?
No, critical and important questions, and I'm really excited that you guys have this report coming out. Where can people find the work that you all are doing at Leaders for a Beautiful Struggle?
It's LBS, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, lbsbaltimore.com. So we have, just click on the publication sector, but also sign up for our newsletter. We're doing a lot of work here in Baltimore around reparations for the war on drugs, investing in community and police accountability. We're not a nonprofit. We make a very intentional effort to challenge the nonprofit industrial complex and invest in community control solutions. So the violence prevention work is one of the most essential things that we've just done multiple YouTube talks on. We have a podcast, In Search of Black Power. Look for that on YouTube on the Black Power Media media channel where I talk about that more in depth. And this is just not just something we talk about. We're actually passing legislation to work on all these issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can't recommend your work more highly. We will absolutely bring you back to talk more about this report and all these issues. Lawrence Grand Prix, Director of Research at LBS, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, Eugene.
Yes, Rania.
I mean, we're like nearing the end of the show, and I think obviously like the main headline topic is what's next, but I have to do it again before we go to our next topic. You guys, you can support Breakthrough News and access exclusive content by becoming a patron at patreon.com/breakthrough news. Where you can access the second half of my show, Dispatches, Eugene's monthly seminar. And you can also donate on YouTube. Am I starting to sound like a broken record? What we should do is like a pre-recorded message. And then in between segments, I can like relax and just chill while a pre-recorded version of me says that.
I'm okay, although you'd be not wearing the same thing, so I don't know if people would fully do it. But that's okay. We can call it a commercial break, and we can just cut to you, go to you full screen. I'm for it. You know, I support that. People say repetition is important to learning.
That's true. I'll be super cheesy about it in the pre-recorded one. I'll be like, hey, I'm Rania. No? Okay. All right. All right.
Okay. But no, however you want to do it. I'm not here to stomp on your self-expression.
No, I feel like I am being policed.
Slightly. What can I say? We need to have a cop on the beat here sometimes.
I'm sorry, you guys. I got to make bad jokes and laugh in between horrible stories because, you know, sometimes the world is not good in so many places. So this is how I deal with it.
Yeah.
My powder explodes.
Oh my God. All right, well, let's turn the page to our headline story today, critically important story, the story of Palestinian resistance. So an eternal story in many ways, but what we recently just saw with the attempt by the Israeli Defense Forces, so-called Defense Forces, I should say, to raid the Jenin camp. And we are very, very honored to be joined once again here by Ali Abunimah, who's the director of the Electronic Intifada and the author of The Battle for Justice in Palestine. Ali, thank you so much for being back with us.
Well, I'm never here for good news, so I'm always happy to talk to you guys, but we have to find a happy occasion to talk about one day.
Yes, I agree 100%, and a long one too, since we brought you on for so many, negative stories. And here we are yet again, the Israeli apartheid forces. I guess here's my first question for you, Ali. I mean, I don't want to be triumphalist about it because obviously it was a terrible assault. But it feels that the Israelis withdrew without, meeting whatever objectives they claim they had set. They're saying they're going to have to go back in. And it's being just like, Israel withdraws. But it seems like, they at least faced a tactical defeat here in Jenin camp from the Palestinian people.
Yeah, and that is perhaps the positive story, is the strength of Palestinian resistance, the determination of the Palestinian resistance, its growing capabilities, and the strong unity and support for it among the Palestinian population. And my colleague here at the Electronic Intifada, Maureen Murphy, wrote a really great analysis on the aftermath of Israel's rampage in Jenin, pointing out that really behind the boasts of the Israeli military and political leadership about, we achieved all our objectives, they really achieved nothing. Even Israeli analysts are pointing out that the Israeli military estimates that there are hundreds of resistance fighters in Jenin, and that the Israeli army claims to have killed a dozen. Of course, that's a severe and tragic loss for the Palestinian families and communities, but it makes no difference to the capabilities of the resistance in the long run. And the same with the weapons they claim to have captured or destroyed. These are a drop in the bucket of what the resistance likely possesses or is able to manufacture. And today, we saw an Israeli soldier killed in a resistance operation in the occupied West Bank. near Kedumim settlement, which happens to be the settlement where Israeli minister, the fanatical far-right extremist Bezalel Smotrich, lives. And again, that goes to show that for all of its rampages and bluster, the very next day, the Palestinian resistance is still capable of carrying out, of dealing a severe blow to the occupation. This was an officer who was killed, and that officer was no safer for the rampage that Israel carried out in Jenin over the last week or so.
And I mean, just to clarify too, one of the things that the Israeli spokesperson, Richard Hecht, was saying, the Israeli military spokesperson was saying quite openly, boasting about in US media, was that the goal of the operation was to, quote, break the safe haven mindset of Jenin refugee camp. So this was a pretty open and blatant attack on everybody. To make them scared of allowing resistance people to be among them. And of course, that definitely did not work despite all the devastation, because that's not how it works, right? Because people either have the option to like submit to everything Israel wants and just like be subjects and occupied forever and pushed out, or to fight back. And they're choosing to fight back. But also what was interesting about this moment, and something you all covered at Electronic Intifada, was the way in which the Palestinian Authority and the institutions that represent it were being attacked also by those who were angry about the collaboration with the Israelis. I mean, we heard a lot of statements from the Palestinian Authority, statements that we often hear whenever Israel does anything, that upsets the population too much, such as no more security coordination and these sorts of things. But you had Palestinian PA police stations being burnt, being attacked. You had fights between these people, because at one point it was like these PA police forces were in fact, trying to put down resistance, which is what they often, do. That's their whole point of being. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how we're seeing more episodes of Palestinians being fed up with this force that was created by the Americans and the Israelis to police Palestinians?
Yeah. Let me answer the question this way. Israel always dresses its operations, its attacks, as having tactical military goals. We want to capture so-called terrorists or destroy weapons workshops or whatever they say. The goals of this attack on Jenin were strictly political. They were first and foremost to satisfy the bloodlust of Israeli settlers and the Israeli public more generally, who have been angered by the fact that Palestinian resistance has been growing stronger in the West Bank, and the most fanatical leaders in Israel, like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, have been demanding blood. I mean, really demanding that Palestinian blood be spilled. And since Netanyahu's coalition depends on them, he had to give them some red meat. And this rampage through a refugee camp where thousands of civilians live and the wholesale destruction of the infrastructure there, attacking the hospital in Jenin camp, all of this is part of the revenge that the settlers demand. So that's one political goal. The other political goal, and this comes to your question, Rania, was shoring up the Palestinian Authority, because Benjamin Netanyahu said it the other day. He said, we don't want the Palestinian Authority to collapse. We need the Palestinian Authority. And when they do their job for us, they do it well. Those were Netanyahu's words just a week or so ago. Jenin and the northern West Bank more generally, Jenin, Nablus, and areas around there, have been real strongholds of Palestinian resistance. And the Israeli and American sponsors of the Palestinian Authority have been demanding that the Palestinian Authority go in and crush the resistance. But of course, the Palestinian Authority isn't capable of doing that, no matter how much they wanted to do it. And so Israel went into Jenin, and one of the stated goals was to sort of clear out the resistance, to allow the Palestinian Authority to come back in and exert control on behalf of Israel. But again, this produced exactly the opposite effect, as the dramatic scenes from Jenin showed, where Palestinians kicked out the top leaders affiliated with the Fatah ruling party of the Palestinian Authority, of Mahmoud Abbas's ruling party. People shouting "Barra, barra, barra," get out, get out, get out, and attacking or invading Palestinian Authority facilities in Jenin was an expression of the disgust that Palestinians generally feel at the collaborationist role the Palestinian Authority plays and was set up to play. Because remember that the Palestinian Authority has tens of thousands of men under arms, armed with the permission of Israel and funded and trained by the United States and the European Union, with the collaboration of countries like Jordan. They're actually trained in Jordan to a great extent. And they just, when the Israelis show up, they go to their barracks or they disappear. And people are saying, why isn't this Palestinian Authority army effectively out there defending Palestinians from the settlers, at least? The tear gas they're using and the guns they have are being turned on Palestinians, not against those who are attacking Palestinians and invading their land. So there's no amount of spin that the Palestinian Authority or its sponsors can put on this. Palestinians can see it for what it is, and which is an arm of the Israeli occupation, and it's impossible now to paper that over. When young men are giving their lives to defend Jenin refugee camp, to defend Nablus, to defend Jerusalem, men who aren't given training, men who aren't provided arms funded and supported by the European Union and the United States, people are understandably outraged that these so-called Palestinian Authority security forces are doing absolutely nothing to defend their people. What are they there for? They're there to defend Israel and the settlers from the Palestinian people. And that's simply a repulsive and disgusting situation for any people under occupation.
Well, and Ali, we've alluded to it here. I mean, I'm always hesitant to say something's more extreme than the past. I mean, the whole Zionist project is extreme, but I mean, in the way it's like, if we're talking about, say, the New York Times, they'll have like one article that will say this happened in Jenin and Palestinians are upset, zero context. Then like maybe 4 weeks later or something, they'll have some story about settlers taking over more land, no real connection between the two. But I mean, it does seem that when you look at this, this government now, that there is a truly aggressive push to seize huge amounts of land in the West Bank. Like, this is not random that the Palestinian resistance has had to ramp up here. It's not just random violence. I mean, it seems to be directly related to, again, the whole thing is extreme, but what seems like a truly extreme land grab here.
I think you're right, but again, if I can provide a little bit of context, Israel's tactics are not different. Israel has been attacking refugee camps, murdering civilians, stealing land since its founding and since before its founding. That's how it came to be, and that's how it exists. I think the difference now is that Israel no longer feels a need to disguise what it's doing in any way. They no longer feel a need to put a liberal veneer over this brutal racist settler colony. They now can do it in the open because they know that Joe Biden will back them, Barack Obama will back them, Nancy Pelosi will back them, Donald Trump will back them, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will back them. Nobody will demand any accountability from them. They can murder children. They can murder Palestinian Americans like Shireen Abu Akleh, or the Palestinian American great-grandfather Omar Assad, who was murdered by the Israeli army last January. They can do this with total impunity. And on the contrary, Congress will keep voting them weapons package after weapons package. Mm-hmm. So why, if you're Israel, why go to all the trouble of pretending to be a liberal democracy when you can just wear your fascism on your sleeve? Just the same way that, fascists in Ukraine can do that, and they will have the whole Western media whitewashing them and pretending that what we see with our own eyes is not actually there. And I think also it's important to note that, one of the liberal responses to Palestinian resistance has always been, oh, if you Palestinians just put down your arms and behave nicely, the whole world will come and support you, and just behave like Martin Luther King, and don't give the Israelis an excuse. Don't be like those big bad groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza who fire rockets at Israel. Well, those liberal arguments are exposed by what Israel is doing, because you have, in a sense, kind of a controlled experiment in the West Bank, where for years and years and years, the collaborationist Palestinian Authority suppressed armed resistance on behalf of Israel. There was little to no armed resistance. Palestinians would go out on unarmed marches in villages like Bil'in or Nabi Saleh or wherever it was, and people would know about it. It would be covered to some extent in the media. Did that stop the Israelis stealing land, building Jewish-only colonies, murdering Palestinians, putting thousands of Palestinians in prison, raiding homes every night? No. The absence of armed resistance only gave Israel a green light to escalate its theft of Palestinian land in the West Bank. So what Palestinians in the West Bank are concluding, like Palestinians in Gaza, is that armed resistance is imposed on them by the conditions that exist. It's not something that they take up wantonly or just because they're not smart enough to know, as well as those commentators sitting in Washington or New York or Europe or wherever it is. For Palestinians, resistance is an existential matter. If they stop resisting, they will be wiped off the map by the Euro-American settler colony that is Israel. And this is openly declared by the Israeli government, that only Jews have a right to nationhood or statehood or existence in the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. So resistance is something that Palestinians have, as Nelson Mandela said, it is the oppressor who determines the mode of the struggle, and it is Israel that has determined that there is going to be, unfortunately, a violent armed struggle to liberate Palestine, because Israel has given the people of Palestine no other option to obtain their basic rights and liberation. That's the choice Israel made. That's the choice Joe Biden makes by continuing to arm Israel. That's the choice that the European Union makes by continuing to arm and finance Israel. And they are to blame. They are to blame for the bloodshed, not Palestinians who are resisting, exercising their right to resist.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, Ali, we really appreciate you coming on and helping us sort through all of this in the midst of the Western media fog. Electronic Intifada, can't recommend it more higher, but thanks again for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. Thank you for covering it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great way to be at the end of a show, like fired up.
Yes, yes. Well,
Ali
it was
fires
once
you up.
said by a Palestinian leader to the people of Jenin in the Second Intifada, you are Jenin grad. And I think that's true. Also known as the martyr's capital. Can't be crushed. First Intifada, Second Intifada. Now it's always the beating heart, really, of the Palestinian resistance. So, once again, we've seen the Israelis go in and do their thing, but they can't kill the resistance. Can't be done. That does bring us to the end of our show here today, Rania. As always, sad time for us, I know. Perhaps for our viewers, I don't know. Maybe they're ready for a break, but nonetheless, Rania, please go ahead.
I just want to remind our viewers that if you can't get enough of breakthrough news, I know I can't.
Yeah. Well, thank God for that.
You should become a patron at patreon.com/breakthrough news, and you can access more of our exclusive content and also in the process support our work here at Breakthrough.
Yes, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. But that will bring us to the end of the show. Patreon.com/breakthrough news. Patreon.com/breakthrough news. Get the fantastic semi-secret parts of Dispatches with Rania Khalek. But we will be back with you as always next week. So for Breakthrough News, see you next time.